Before this video begins, this is not a political opinion, so do not take any of this that way. With that all being said and that all out the way now, let's jump into it. Did wokeness destroy gaming? Wow, this is a very controversial video for me to be making. Now, the first reason why I want to talk about why I'm actually making this video, it comes from a load of comments that I got on my Is Gaming Dead video, about the sole reason as to why gaming feels like it's at some form of stagnation and or just dying. I don't know where I sit fully. It's kind of why the video exists. It's more of a conversation piece more than a full-blown opinion of every single facet of why everything is the way it is. But I did see a lot of people either blaming one of two things, which was either wokeness or capitalism. This was honestly a lot of the people's consensus. I'll be throwing up some comments throughout this video, but you can go on that video and see through 7,000 comments how many either blame capitalism or wokeness. It is absurd how many just choose umbrella terms to throw it under. To me, I do think a lot of the views that come across as either blaming it under capitalism or wokeness just come down to political ideologies more than anything, or at least looking through a extreme political lens instead of actually having a level of nuance about the topic. I found this script and recording process really hard to do, as I didn't want to make the video if it wasn't something that I genuinely stood by, and I didn't want it to convey political opinions and make it come across as if I am giving my thoughts on different political issues, but overall I didn't want it to be an opinion that I do not hold myself. So in this video I'm going to be discussing the arguments that I saw commonly most used about wokeness and capitalism, and after that I'll go over my overall conclusion as to what I think about this. Now here are some comments from my Is Gaming Dying video blaming wokeness as the issue, and now here is a load of comments blaming capitalism as the issue. So as you can see, it isn't exactly like it's a one group of people only blame this group. It is literally the case of there is two groups of people out there who either blame capitalism or blame wokeness. It is literally the definition of a left and right argument, but we can continue. Now what I find really interesting about both of these arguments is they don't really end up going into the core of the argument. They kind of just go with an outlined scale of what wokeness or capitalism is and why they are bad in the gaming world. They'll rarely say that lazy writing is the issue, or that the dev teams either being useless or just pushing out to get something done quickly could be an issue. They always seem to follow this idea that one of the things are the main issue overall and can answer any question around the topic of what happened in this form of media. They always seem to follow this idea that this one thing is the issue that can answer any question around the idea of why this form of media that we all love had some sort of decay over the last few years. Now one of the first arguments that I saw over most others was the idea that companies are simply pandering to people's views and feelings, which I do think there is a chance that this could be the case. I do think we see this in some forms of movies, however I don't think it's a massive issue within the world of gaming, as when you're looking at one of the games that are used as examples for going woke, you end up getting basically sent to go look at Last of Us 2 for example. But really to me, I don't really see an issue from a wokeness perspective with this game. The biggest thing for me when it came to The Last of Us Part 2 was I didn't want to play a game that was just purely depressing, with no element of hope. But I also thought the storytelling wasn't that great. It kept making you hit high points and then just making you trudge through story for hours on end without there feeling like the climax of the game was the actual climax of the game. I don't think that Ellie being gay is an issue in any way, but I do think some companies probably just look at having diversity and wokeness as a form of shield, which is the next argument that I saw most commonly chosen. Having diversity as a shield, they don't actually care about representation. They're simply doing it so that if someone is critical of their game, they can use words like racist, sexist, or bigot towards people disliking their game. Now again, I don't think it's something that actually happens as much as some people like to believe it does. I would say there was way more controversy around devs, for example, complaining about Elden Ring's UI and open world because they were simply jealous of the success that the game got, over many of the different things that people will class as woke outrage. I've only really ever seen the issue of diversity being used as a shield on the big screen and TV more than gaming, massively anyway. You have films like Captain Marvel that personally I don't like, mainly for the character, but not because the character is a woman, but because I simply don't like characters, for example, like Superman. I think the characters that are way too OP are just irritating, and there's nothing heroic about their character when there is no sacrifice. If there's no sacrifice and you know what you're getting into and you use all your powers because you know that you're not risking your life, is it really heroic? I then also eventually came to just dislike Brie Larson. Again, it's not because she's a female actor, but it's the way that she deals with people disliking her character. She took the same approach as Elizabeth Banks, the director of Charlie's Angels, where she started to say that people who dislike her character just don't like strong female characters and are sexist. So that starts to rub off the wrong way towards many people, and it's why she isn't overly liked by many within the Marvel community, and at least her character as a whole isn't overly overly looked at fondly. This isn't something that happens at mass in the gaming world, it's something that you see in the likes of the giant world of Marvel. And then we have the last of the three main arguments, which is the feeling like you're being lectured to versus actually playing the game. Okay, so this point is something that, again, I struggle to see in gaming. I can see what people might think during some films and movies, but in games, anyway, I don't really see this as a massive thing as much as some people like to believe it to be. Unless you're looking at everything through this political lens, then I can see why you might get to this conclusion, but I've made the conscious effort over the last year to stop caring as much about politics, and I started enjoying a lot of stuff, trying to take a step back from politics as a whole. So again, the idea that wokeness destroyed gaming is simply one that I don't agree with. I think that it's definitely something that can affect games in a negative way, but I don't think it's something that is on such a massive scale issue as some people like to make it out to be. If you don't agree with me, then let me know what your thoughts are. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are in the comments section, because honestly, if I do decide to make another follow-up video in the future, 6 months time from now or a year from now, then I have something extra to build off of as well. Now though, let's move on to the topic of capitalism and the arguments that I heard most commonly used against it. Now I do think if you're going to blame capitalism as a whole system and a structure for the issues, then you're just letting outward opinions take over your whole view of this art form and media that you're consuming. Now I do think that there is parts of capitalism that actually make a massive issue in games. For example, I think the heavy corporatization of some games out there basically ended up making art stagnate, as they don't end up taking any form of financial risk in the reward of actually gaining a lot. But also another part of it is our rampant consumerism and non-essential buying mentality that we now live within. But what I see from a lot of people in the comment section is they just say big boy capitalism equals bad system, so that's why everything in games has just become a clone of one another. But we've never lived in a world that has truly existed with games coming out outside of the capitalist culture that we live within. Now just before I continue onto this topic, I actually wanted to address something that follows this exact same thing. I got a comment saying that I'm incorrect on this belief that we've never had games exist outside of a capitalist scale, and basically using examples like China and them having games come out. China, yes, they are a communist state. Overall, that is them. However, they try and work on a global scale, and global scales is capitalism right now. That is the dominating factor across the world. So they do participate in capitalism to release games. They don't release games under this idea that all of their people are paid on this equal wage, on everything being done on an equal playing field so that they can release another FIFA that's identical to the other one. That is not what happens. Capitalism and the communism side of things, I don't think you can use the argument saying that just because games have come out of China, for example, or other socialist states outside of China, so, you know, basically like most of Europe or other areas in Asia, you can't use the argument that pretty much because those places aren't inherently fully capitalist, that doesn't mean they are not feeding into a capitalist society, or at least a globalist capitalist society. But capitalism is in its nature meant to help things grow, but you only grow to a point. Capitalism is the reason we had the boom in gaming between the 80s and the 2010s, and even really to this day. With capitalism, we have a ton of companies trying to get our attention, and with that, competing against one another to make the best games for the consumers. So I find it a really hard argument to use the idea that capitalism at its fullest is the reason that games have become stagnant. It would be naive of me, however, to believe that there isn't parts of the system that are the issue towards it, such as consumerism, corporatization, and greed. Consumerism is the first of the three parts of capitalism that I would say are the actual issues within it as a broad spectrum. Almost all of us are victim to this issue. I love tech, for example, and I love new games. However, I try not to feed into the idea that for me to have supposedly a higher status in life, it requires me to have the newest things. For example, for myself, I love new tech and games, like I just mentioned, but I rarely buy new clothes or eat out. So I am a consumer and deal with the issues of consumerism to a degree, but within the areas that I am in. However, for me, recently, games has become one of those that I've had to take a step back from because monetary value of new games has gone up, and they push a lot of monetization onto you, but with a little to justify the price thereafter. Now, to squash this idea that £70 is a fine price for games that are anywhere between 50 and 100 hours worth of content, yes, they are cheap by a point of how much the games cost to make. RDR2, for example, was £60 on release but cost 500 million to make. That does not mean that everyone should be paying 500 million for a copy of the game. That does not mean every single person should be paying £100, £200, £300 for the game purely because the game costs that much to make. Most people were fine with the price due to the quality of this game. However, the company itself, Rockstar, knew that they were going to make that money back quick, as within the first month of this game releasing, they made all of that money back, plus an additional 250 million. So there is an awareness that they will gain most of, if not all of their money spent right away when this game launches, or when most games launch anyway. But my other point that I want to make about this is that I don't care if games like RDR2, God of War, or Elden Ring are hypothetically £70, as those games actually have quality to justify it. But also, they aren't pushing microtransactions. A new Call of Duty game is going to charge £70 and then have a £10 minimum microtransaction that most people will end up falling into, and likely will spend the money due to the idea that it's a micropayment versus the full price that they have paid out for this game. It's only £10 in comparison to the 70 I've already spent, so what's the matter with it? So it's not that I'm anti-games becoming more expensive to cover costs. My issue is down to the lack of ethical practices within games and their pricing structure. The biggest one that comes up as a massive issue more than anything will be games that come out and are either just full reskins of the game that came out a year or two prior, or just unfinished games being pushed out to make tons of money to get as much of it done as possible, and claiming extra content will be coming out along the way. They aren't giving you much quality, but they're still asking for money without any good exchange. Now this is linked to our rampant consumerism because we currently live in a world where we conflate status with things we own. When we play games, we believe that the reason we buy microtransaction is just because it's a skin that is cool, or it's because you just want to open that loot box, when in reality, the games that you play, like CSGO, make you believe that the skins you've just purchased in some way either gives you a little bit of a higher status, or in some way improves your gameplay, when you know it doesn't. One way to prove this idea is the CSGO community, which is why I mentioned the game a second ago. Realistically, the two reasons people spend money on skins in this game is because of Valve's internal system, making people end up joining their marketplace that runs a similar way to the stock market, so in a way is micro gambling, and the other is their pro teams. Due to the massive success of their pro teams and the skins that those players use, it works in the same way as athletes who use different types of tech. When Beats, for example, was blowing up, the reason why Beats ended up soaring in value and people were buying them like crazy is because they saw people using them, people they admired, people they thought were great at whatever they do, so they must improve by getting these products. It's the blatant tactic that gets used for consumerism. It's a really weird system that we live in, where even in a gaming world, we feel like there is somehow some way that we can buy things that literally have no value in the real world, and they give us a form of social status. They have zero utility. Like, if you look at why we buy a new iPhone or a Samsung product, well, firstly, a lot of us will tell ourselves that we need an upgrade, which might be true, but most of the time when we are upgrading a phone, it's really just the belief that our idea of what our phone is outdated, when in reality, it's not. And 99% of the time it is because the way that all of this is marketed to us as the consumers, and how people who always get new tech on a daily basis talk about these products as if they are so much better than what came before, or 2 years ago before, it then breeds into this idea that we basically are losing out on something, which for some might be true. For example, if you went from an iPhone 11 to a 13, it's actually quite a massive jump because of its battery life. But if you go from a 12 to a 14, honestly, there's not a big jump. But due to the consumerist culture that we live within, we end up just accepting being screwed over by these companies. But what these phones, for example, the iPhone 11, 12, 13, and 14 all have in common is that they change something slightly so that you believe that you're missing out on something on a social level. The 11 and the 13, there is utility to the difference. The 13 has a outstanding battery life. The 14 does not have much of a difference. All it has is the dynamic island, as they like to call it. That is not a big enough of a change that should actually make people want to buy this phone. Now, I know I own this phone, but I bought it for the sole intention of making videos out of it, okay? So stop bullying me in the comments about it. This just means, though, that the practices that many of us dislike will never really change due to the amount of people who will just conflate status with products. Corporatisation, however, might be one of the more interesting parts of this conversation. Now, I don't actually think inherently companies or development studios going corporate is bad, as it means these companies that make good games with amazing developers can have some form of management and structure to make sure that they're still around in the next 10 to 20 years. I think that full companies are great examples to use in this entire conversation when it comes to corporatization, but showing different perspectives of why they're viewed in their different ways, and those companies are Bethesda, CD Projekt Red, Ubisoft, and Rockstar. Rockstar is probably the best example of more early on corporatization within gaming that has generally worked. They've never really released a game that is in a bad state, and they normally are always working on making moves that are bigger within the gaming world and driving it forward. But generally, they aren't that bad for a lot of the corporatization within games. Yes, there is some issues about how they handle different games, and for example, how the remasters came along. However, I wouldn't say that they were that bad. Yes, I think they could have got away with maybe doing it if they charged like £20 maybe, but I think that charging like £40-50 for 3 games that really weren't that great looking, it just seemed a bit odd. But people's main criticism of Rockstar out of anything is GTA Online. However, for me, the reason why I don't really care about this, and I think people who actually complain all the time about GTA Online still being a thing, don't realise that this helps funding for Rockstar and the future projects. Yes, some of it goes to shareholders, but it goes to shareholders anyway. This gives them more money to use towards the next game. People like putting it down due to how long it's been going for, but in reality, that is actually a really good thing, and it shows that they can make games that are fun enough for people to continue playing for years and years without ever losing a mass amount of their fan base. They don't have to do a Call of Duty where they need to release a new game every year to keep people in the loop of Call of Duty. They released GTA 5 in 2013. People are still playing GTA Online now. That is insane to think. That is on the same scale as something like CSGO, League of Legends, and other massive multiplayer games out there. Then you've got a company like Bethesda that is a really interesting one. They've obviously done things like re-release Skyrim a few too many times, and Fallout 76. However, I wouldn't say they've done anything that is necessarily overly bad. Yes, some of it can be classed as maybe a bit mediocre or just questionable, but really I would say that they are nowhere near as bad as someone like EA with Battlefront 1 or 2 on release. And the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of YouTubers like to slate Bethesda for this idea that they are awful, purely because obviously they've not released a big game in so long, and 76 was their last game that they released. Really, they haven't released awful games. Yes, 76 was a massive letdown and was not good. That is one in however many games that they've made that have been considered either masterpieces or great games. It's an absurd idea to believe that. I can see why people think Ubisoft are bad, because they've released now multiple of the same game. They're not realizing that the formula that they are using doesn't work anymore. But trying to blame Bethesda for their issues as if they've done tons of things wrong, like EA or Ubisoft or Activision, just makes no sense to me. CD Projekt Red is then the next one, which again, I think is a really interesting one. They haven't actually done anything that is necessarily that bad. Yes, they released Cyberpunk. Before anyone complains to me about how I'm wrong and I'm delusional, I've literally only just started playing Cyberpunk, so I'm not a fanboy of the game, don't worry. They released one game that was extremely unfinished. The Witcher was the same. It was not a fully finished game, really. However, people love that game, and people believe it should be Game of the Decade, and I believe it did win Game of the Decade, I think. But the fact that most people love The Witcher 3, they love Cyberpunk now that it's all fixed. How are they going to slate this company that are now making moves to become more corporatized and release more games on a more of a bigger scale than, let's say, Bethesda or Rockstar, but not as big of a scale in terms of constant releases as something like Ubisoft? They aren't going to try and go full Ubisoft, making one game a year. They're actually going to try and make maybe one game every 2 years, and hopefully that happens. They've openly said, though, that this is subject to change if they can't do it. And honestly, I do believe them, thinking that Cyberpunk was announced, in 2013, 2014, and it didn't come out until 2020. It would make a massive amount of sense that, they probably won't release 3 Witcher games within 6 years. But now let's talk about Ubisoft, which honestly I think is the full embodiment of what we call corporatization in a bad way. They simply are a full definition of the idea of money printing. They turn the wheel and it starts making a new game that has the same mechanics, same story, slightly better looks than every single year prior. Then proceed to ask people £60 for the game. Mirage is only 50, which actually I do think was a very good move. They're trying to hit the point that they've honestly just screwed over their fans from prior prior games, and it's now starting to backfire. However, the fact that they have not released a gameplay footage and they are asking for pre-order when we know we've been shafted so many times by Assassin's Creed is just a bit ridiculous. But Ubisoft embody what the other three do not, which is the lack of innovation and risk. Rockstar have been rumoured for some time to be working on a new IP. We don't know if this is 100% true. However, we know that they take risks. They at least make tons of great games. They put so much money down to make these amazing games, whilst Ubisoft put down next to nothing in comparison to Rockstar, make games that are nowhere near the quality of Rockstar, but still expect the same amount of money. We know that CD Projekt Red released one new IP with Cyberpunk, and they're now planning on another new IP as well. Bethesda are releasing Starfield, which is a new IP. At least two of these companies are making a massive move in the gaming world, and they're willing to take a risk in doing so. Bethesda, if they really only cared about making easy money and they didn't care about making a gaming world that people love, they would have already made Elder Scrolls 6 by now. But a new IP is way more risky, and the longer they take to release Elder Scrolls 6, they will end up building up more and more hype, which could make or break the game on its launch. For almost the last 10 years, we've seen new games from Ubisoft every single year, and many times there's been 2 games every single year that are classed as AAA titles. If we're complaining about corporatization, I do think we need to clarify that something like Bethesda, CD Projekt Red or Rockstar really are not the bad apples in this scene. EA aren't as bad now. They've actually somehow, in a way, reclaimed an image that they never really had. They've built up themselves to not be as bad. Ubisoft, however, are the embodiment of what people talk about when they talk about bad gaming companies. One thing that people don't want is a lack of imagination and art. The other 3 companies I mentioned at least have 2 of the 3. They either have imagination, ambition, or talent. Ubisoft simply has 1, which is talented people working for them, which then releases high quality looking games on a surface level, but they lack what backs this art form, which is the genuine artists. Greed. This is what I think we actually find fully awful within the gaming world. We can handle companies going corporate and the consumerism that we live in today's world, but the issue that makes these issues look even bigger is because of greed. Nobody likes someone who is greedy, but people hate more than just one person who is greedy. They hate companies that are greedy. Which is where we go into what I think is the real stain on gaming. Capitalism isn't the issue, it's human nature. We want as much as possible. This isn't a capitalist idea. This is something that has been spoken about in many different societies before capitalism, and was in religious texts dating back 2,000 to 4,000 years ago. So it can't be blamed at the feet of capitalism, but this is one part that very much gets fed into the idea of capitalism. We want to have more and dominate whatever field we are within. It's why companies like EA and Ubisoft release the same game every year with very little change, to then be able to turn over massive amounts of profit. However, we have allowed them to get to this point, as we keep buying their games. But then the other side of that is obviously 10 years ago when we were buying their newest and latest game, there was genuine upgrades in every single upgrade. It wasn't just what it is today, where there is next to no change. But now, where it is so much harder for the next FIFA game to really be that much better, people just end up on the borderline same game they're playing before, just with some new grass textures. But the issues that I've mentioned in this video all run rampant in gaming, purely because it stems from the desire to earn more and more, which is just a greedy trait. However though, this is human nature. We simply want more. The biggest issues in gaming are down to 3 things. The lack of finish on products that come out, scummy microtransaction practices, such as high-priced skins and XP boosters to be able to play the game properly, and the last issue is down to the lack of innovation. I've talked about all 3 of these throughout this video, and I'll go into a little bit of depth into it right now, but I've also spoken about it in Is Gaming Dying, so I'm not going to talk about it for ages. But all of these simply stem from greed. The games that come out broken are because companies want their money now. They don't want to wait for it. They don't want to wait to actually have a good product to sell. They simply believe that they can put out a game and hope that people will stick along for the ride. Loot boxes, skins, and XP boosters make people think that they need to pay to actually play at a high level of skill in this game or any games in general. They only exist with the sole intention of making money. Skins in games, if the game is actually good enough, people shouldn't need to look at buying them in this false paradigm that it equates to a level of status in the game. And XP boosters are, literally by design, chosen to be the way they are because the game's creators handicap the players who have paid full price for the game but don't feel like they're able to play the game properly, so they have to spend that extra £10 to be able to play it properly. properly. Get the XP booster. If you want a quick example of that, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Origins. All three of those games you can play by yourself and actually do okay generally. Valhalla is a lot worse than the other two. Literally, if you want to just level up at a good rate that is keeping you basically above or around the same level as some of the characters that you're fighting against, depending on the level of difficulty the game is set at, then you literally have to buy XP boosters. The game has been shown to be like this, and this is a company that claimed when Valhalla was coming out they would never do this. They claimed microtransactions were not in this game. A month later after launch, they did it. Why do we trust this company? Microtransactions to me are simply ethically questionable actions that companies take, and they know that this will break into the human psyche in the attempt to make more profit. This isn't something that's against games in general as a whole, as this is something that actually goes against every form of marketing strategy ever. But the issue that I have with this more than anything is most games out there, yes, Call of Duty is put towards an adult audience. They know that adults are not their primary target group that is playing. They know that they have a lot more people who are kids who are turning around and being like, please get me this skin, mum. Please spend that £10, £20 on a skin for me, please. I need this. Why do you need it? Because it looks cool. You want me to spend my hard-earned money on this. To me, it is a scummy practice. To you, it might not be, but it is for me. Now, the last of those three is a lack of innovation. Companies know that they can make easy money by hardly pushing the bar. They take next to no risk when they release the new FIFA game, as they know people will buy it. Ubisoft take next to no risk with the next Assassin's Creed game, as again, they know people are going to buy it. These companies don't need to take calculated risks. They can simply take the safest path possible, which isn't even a calculated risk at this point. The ones that end up looking like Ubisoft are the ones who took the safe path. They're the ones who ended up with a full catalogue of Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and maybe the occasional Tom Clancy game. I don't believe that wokeness or capitalism as an umbrella term as a whole is the reason why gaming is in a downfall or a state of just a decline or stagnation. Don't mind what word you use, but if you try to tell me that it is on the up and up, right now there is at least stagnation. Both play a part, but I don't think that they are single-handedly the reason for the issues. Now, I do hope you enjoyed this video. This one was very hard for me to make as I wanted to do it right and I didn't want to give off too much of a political stance. Now, I know that some people will probably turn around and say to me that some of my arguments might be weak or that some of my arguments are incorrect, which is fair enough. You can have your opinion on that. I'm pretty much stating generally a thesis of ideas that I have. This isn't my full stance. This isn't my full opinion. This is not my cultivated entire viewpoint on something. I'm willing to hear other people's thoughts on this and see if it goes against any of my beliefs and if it actually changes how I think about something, as during this process of scripting this, I definitely had many times while I was reading different things where people made very valid points. However, I do think that both people who blame capitalism solely as the issue and people who solely blame wokeness as the issue are too politically driven. I do think that there is a massive difference between the gaming landscape that we live within right now and companies like Blizzard are very, very far and few between when it comes to companies that are actually like openly very woke in comparison than, let's say, something like the movie world, where you've got Marvel, the biggest dominating factor over everything cinema related. If Marvel did not exist right now, cinema would crumble as an industry. It's the only reason why they're staying alive. Look into this, it's 100% a thing, but they are able to now just get to a point where they can just kind of push political ideology based off of what some people think about it and what some thought pieces will say about what they're talking about. So yeah, I don't really think that either of these arguments are necessarily wrong, but I don't think either one of these are necessarily a full conclusive answer to what is the right choice. Now, if you guys did enjoy this video, make sure to leave a like and do subscribe for more content in the future. I make gaming content every single week at this point. I now make gaming content every Friday, Sunday, and I'm now going to be moving to doing 3 videos a week on this channel in the very soon, not far distant future. So yeah, if you are enjoying the content or you enjoyed this video and you want to see more think pieces like this or just general more video essays and just content by me, make sure to subscribe for more of that content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a good one.